Hello and welcome back to the Out of Program podcast. Today we're joined by Ryan Kerstein, a consultant plastic surgeon and the Associate Medical Director for Research and Innovation at Buckinghamshire Healthcare NHS Trust. He leads the Brain Innovation Unit, serves as editor of the RCS, Royal College of Surgery, Bulletin, and directs the Royal College of Surgeons iHub, championing clinician-led innovation on the national level. Hi Ryan and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, and thanks for the invitation.
Brilliant. So let's get straight into it then. And we start at the beginning with your early journey. So what drew you into study medicine and what were those early years like?
So, unfortunately, or fortunately, my story is the really stereotypical one that drives people nuts on the kind of run up to the med school interviews of why do you want to be a doctor? Well, at the age of 5, my younger brother ended up in NICU after he was born, and when he was finally discharged, I said to the pediatrician, "When I grow up, I want to be just like you." And as probably true to form for the rest of my career, I'm incredibly stubborn and never changed my mind, never really looked at any other options, just went, well, that's my decision made, so let's drive towards that. So went into med school pretty convinced I wanted to be a pediatrician.
Okay.
Then, interestingly, at the time, got more and more drawn to surgery from a it just made sense in a way that the medical side didn't. I don't come from a medical background, so I didn't really understand the difference between medicine and surgery. And I remember getting a surgical textbook along with my medical one, and the surgery one was just so much more straightforward. I wonder if it's a dyslexia thing and kind of the drug names, or just the kind of, here is problem, here is solution, we will deliver this. So through med school towards the end of med school, decided I want to be a pediatric surgeon. And I remember having a specialty placement for ped surgery and talking to the consultant. And he was like, well, only do this if you're really sure, because you're going to be peri-retirement and you're the one coming in. So what I don't know about that. So then decided I was going to be an ENT surgeon. That's it. I'm definitely set for that. And was on my way, had an ENT core training program. 2 days before my F2, my program got switched and I had plastic surgery. I don't know what that is. Like, why would I want to do that? And they were like, no, this is what you're doing. So did that, loved it, started my ENT core training, which started with plastic surgery. I had 8 months of plastics, and then literally the rest is history from that point on.
And did you enjoy your time as a doctor? Because a lot of people will describe the excitement of being a student, but then translating that into practice and the realities of actually practicing medicine to be a bit of a culture shock. So how was it for you?
Yeah, almost listening to you say that is incredibly relieving. So I don't think, if I'm being brutally honest, I don't think I really understood what the job of medicine was through med school. So as an Imperial med student, kind of wonderful teaching, wonderful placements, great experience. But I remember the first day of being a house officer, being kind of told off by the A&E nurse because somebody was breaching. I didn't know what breaching meant. And they were hitting their 4-hour target. And apparently this was a big issue, and I didn't know. And I was also being called from somewhere else. And then the reg saying, right, why are you in accident emergency? You're meant to be up on the wards. And yeah, I remember being absolutely it just wasn't in any way what I expected. And overall, probably I didn't enjoy my house officer year from a work point of view, and had a bit of a maybe I'll start looking at other careers. So did I enjoy it as a job itself? No, but the nuts and bolts of it are amazing. And it's still something I get back to, that it is a phenomenal career that I spend part of my day, because I mainly do skin cancer. So a lot of my patients are in their late 70s, 80s, the most amazing stories that you get to learn. You get to kind of take people on a journey for the kind of 5 years of follow-up that you're with them for. And it is a great privilege and a great honor. But yeah, in the early days, I'm not sure I did.
Mm. If we take a step back there, so whilst in medical school, you founded a business, ASAP Healthcare. And it's interesting kind of hearing what you described there about reflecting on alternative careers, because in fact, you actually started something whilst a student. So do you want to tell me a bit more about that? How did it come about and, what is it?
Yeah. So I think I really love problem solving, and I kind of hinted at that as why surgery was more of a kind of time that you have a problem. So the problem we had as med students would be sent off to go and take blood from patients or to put cannula in. And at the time, so bear in mind this was early 2000s, we would either have the reusable tourniquet, um, which would be in our white coat pockets. So definitely aging me as to when I was a med student. We would still wore white coats, or you'd have to go and find it in the ward clerk's desk in one of the drawers. There might be a tourniquet somewhere. They tended to be
Mm,
pretty mucky looking, and so you'd go to the storeroom. You get all of this new kit, the new needles, new bottles, etc. You put your gloves on, and then you get this dirty tourniquet, and you tie that
mm,
round or clip that round the patient. Or, as quite often would happen, that you couldn't find a tourniquet, and so you'd go and take a rubber glove off the wall, and you'd tie that round a patient. And even in the kind of early 2000s, making jokes about NHS funding as to why you were using a rubber glove. But on a serious note, that this is at a time when MRSA was at the front of every newspaper. So you go, well, hang on,
mm,
how can it be that we are having to wash our hands? We're now not allowed to wear watches and ties, and yet we're using the same dirty tourniquet. So that got myself and my flatmate Christian, we were kind of talking one evening saying, well, there must be a better way of doing it. And we started to kind of think about alternatives. And so we thought about what would be a good single use item that you could shape to the right shape. And at the time, if we were going to a club or a uni event, we'd have a rubber band, a kind of plasticized paper band. Well, why can't we use that kind of thing? Because that would be cost effective from an NHS point of view, single use. You could brand it, you could shape it as you want. So that was our kind of starter for 10. And it's amazing that we went on the journey where we went to our local pathology lab to say, could we test tourniquets to see what bugs they grow? Because we visually, these things look dirty. Are they? And Professor Azadian, who was the professor at Chelsea, almost fell off his chair with these two med students coming along saying, we'd really like to do a microbiology research paper. So he agreed, and Chris and I went and took tourniquets off people. We gave them new ones, and we went and we learned how to press into agar and culture things up, and we found that indeed that they did grow bugs, and now we had some validation for our hypothesis. And when I now teach in innovation, kind of talk about how do you prove your hypotheses early on. And it's funny looking back that we actually did that, which was amazing.
yeah.
So from there, we're right. Okay, we're off. We started contacting manufacturers to see if somebody would be interested in creating some prototypes for us, which they did. Then we ran a trial at Chelsea, where the phlebotomy department very kindly agreed to stop using reusable tourniquets for a 2-week period and used our product, and got fantastic feedback. We then put our business plan together, and we got funding on the first go. And we could talk about that in some ways, don't take your first amount of money, because we were so amazed. Like, oh, great, someone's giving us money, let's go. And maybe in hindsight, we could have done that slightly differently. And certainly there are lots of lessons in those early days as to things that could be done differently. And yeah, and then that was the start. So I was fifth year when it started. And then F2 CT1 by the time we were actually on NHS supplies. There was a lot of naivety. And you'll bear in mind, this is before the days of things like the clinical entrepreneur program. We were
Mm,
completely kind of moving around in the dark trying to work out where we go to next. So it was a good 7 years between the day that Chris and I sat in McDonald's cutting out the tray paper into different tourniquets and putting it around each other, to the day it was on NHS Supply Chain as one of the first innovation products.
Great story. And I can see why now teaching innovation, you can take those lessons and apply those because, it's from a pattern perspective, it's almost a perfect kind of case study as to how clinical entrepreneurs should take the ideas that they experience in their day to day, all those frustrations, all their complaints, and actually translate that into impact through, product innovation and then commercialization. So absolutely love what I've heard. But can I ask, in this entire journey, it's one thing to come up with an idea and a study for it, which sounded incredibly elegant, but it's something completely different to then say, "Ooh, wow, we're going to productize it. We're going to make this into a business. We're going to raise money and we're going to get it into the NHS supply chain." So was that daunting for you, or were you just really enthusiastic and just kind of punched through it?
Yeah, I think Chris and I were really enthusiastic and really naive. In that we just went, well, we've got a great product. We found a clear problem. We've created a solution. We really like it, and other people that have tried it have liked it. We don't really know how we're going to sell it, but let's keep going forwards. And certainly the early days, we did a lot of door to door of kind of, oh, what do you think of this? And the basically the thing that people kept saying was, yeah, we really like it. Are you on NHS Supply Chain? Like, no, what's that?
Mm,
And so a lot of early reinforcement, and at the same time, our initial financial backer actually looked at a different model for the business and the IP, and kind of just licensing it out, which we didn't go very well. So we lost a couple of years waiting for this kind of mythical licensing, and then we span out the company, and at that point had enough understanding to say, right, we need to be on NHS Supply Chain, and then once we're on NHS Supply Chain, we kind of go from here and onwards. And one thing, 100% want to stress is that whilst Chris and I were at the start, by the point we're there, we have a CEO in tow. We started to have kind of sales reps. So this is a team activity to take it
mm.
forward. But yeah, so I think to answer your original question, we were just naive and enthusiastic, and that the enthusiasm hasn't gone. Maybe the naivety is slightly reduced, but the enthusiasm is 100% still there.
And you alluded to taking the first check and about, picking the right sources of money. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, so the first, well, in fact, if we go back a step, we entered the Imperial College Business School business plan competition, and we won that. And then I can't remember, there was then kind of a supplementary one that we were runners up, and some of the judges said, you've probably got something here if you want to put
Mm.
a formal bid into Imperial. So
Mm.
we did. We worked out how much it would cost to get our tooling done and to have enough suppliers for the first set of trials. And that was what we asked for. Um, and Imperial, very kindly, we pitched to them. We pitched to the kind of the investment team, and Imperial Innovations backed us, which is fantastic. So that was on a kind of them coming in as a share-based investment. I think if I was going again now, I would probably look at things like grants for that early stage, maybe a bit more in the kind of angel
Mm.
investment, because actually that initial investment was quite small. Um, so I'm not sure I would have gone straight for equity-based investment at that stage, but equally with Imperial's support, we are where we are today. And so, yeah, hindsight's a wonderful thing, but I'm still chuffed with where we got to.
And where is the business today?
So we have sold 75 million tourniquets internationally. We are across the UK, Germany, the Philippines, Australia, Hong Kong, Germany. So we've got a pretty broad stretch. We have our kind of initial product, which is Tourniquet. We have an eco version. We have a Tourniquet, which is a newer single patient tourniquet. We have tourniquets, which is probably one of the only tourniquets specifically designed for children. So we have a portfolio of tourniquets, and yeah, we love it.
And what is yours and Christian's role in the business now? Because you
So
founded it, you did the early hustle, you know.
yeah, so Christian is now private equity, so he left medicine, whereas I stayed in. So I stayed on as a board member and also the kind of CMO slash scientific advisor for the company, and attend the board meetings and give the kind of clinical input. And then we have our CEO, we have our sales team, we have our kind of logistics team colleagues as well. So so I'm just part of the cogs now that keep ASAP moving.
I mean, that's a fantastic story. You know, whenever I ask guests about their early experiences, they will talk about you know, an experience that would be more akin to like a firework. Like, you know, it shoots up like a rocket and then it just bursts. But what you've created is something sustainable and lasting and doesn't require your intervention at all. That was not what I was expecting when I first started asking you about this. So it's super impressive what you've managed to achieve.
Really, and I must say, the first time I remember it was in Durham Hospital, walking down the corridor and looking into a bay. There's a bay with windows. I can still remember seeing the phlebotomist there using Tourniquet for the first time. They're like, I did that. I made that. So it was really cool.
Yeah, no, I have the same feeling when I see clinicians logging into the Patrick app.
Yeah,
No better feeling than seeing the
it's so
impact
cool, isn't it?
of your of your ideas come to life. So so you have this phenomenal experience, but then you still opted to continue with your medical training and go into plastic surgery, which is quite a competitive and demanding specialty. So how did you balance the growth of ASEP with then your clinical training, and why specifically? You know, I guess, well, you've already explained why you picked plastic surgery, but then what was the motivation to go through plastic surgery training pathway?
So I don't think at any point during the ASAP journey did I ever really seriously consider stopping clinical for ASAP. In some ways, it felt like a really great fit in that I'd spotted the problem because of my clinical exposure, and we were able to create this product out of the other end. And it added some credibility for the two things. So, well, actually, this is created by doctors for doctors, and still sitting in the two roles. And at that point, we had our kind of chief exec doing the executive side. So it never really was something to go, actually, I'm going to give all of this up to that. Now, it wasn't straightforward. I've always tried to be incredibly clear on boundaries, in that uh, I am a doctor first, and the hours those are the set hours. Everything else fits in weekends, evenings, and kind of days off, and so on. Which, as a trainee, is really hard because you don't have control of your rota. So now, as a consultant, I know that on a Monday I'm not employed by my trust, so I can work for the college, I can work for the medtech consulting I do, and do various. But as a trainee, that's really hard. It's also I am not of an era where the clinical entrepreneurship and clinical innovation was not a positive thing.
Mm.
So I definitely went through the stages of being told, do not talk about this, take it off your CV. Kind of, this is not what
Wow.
you do to become a surgeon. You do research, teaching, audit. This is fluff. Please stop. Please take it off your CV. So there was a bit of stubbornness. So going back to that stubbornness thing again of going, well, no, I really enjoy it. I remember saying to somebody who was like, you should go and do a PhD. I was like, why? Why would I? Why does that help? And they're like, well, because if you do a PhD, you'll learn to work in a team. You'll learn to manage time and fund budgets. You'll manage to kind of sort out your kind of work life in terms of the academic and the clinical, and it give you all of those skill sets. So cool. Well, I have a company and I have all of those skill sets because of that. So I didn't really buy that this was a lesser way to go about surgical training than to go down the academic. So in my stubbornness was like, no, I'm gonna keep going. I really enjoy this. This gives me a real buzz, and it is complementing my clinical, but the clinical always stayed as the kind of primary driver. I'm sure we'll get on to talk about it, and as one of the reasons. So what would happen is people would come to me down corridors and go, right, I know we're not really meant to talk about this, but could you tell me about the tourniquet? And also, I've got an idea for something. Could you
Mm.
help take me in the direction? So based on the fact that happened a lot, I approached the back press of the British Association of Plastic Surgeons, the president, to say, look, we're an innovative specialty. Why don't we have an innovation group that supports plastic surgeons that want to create stuff? So we created the first national surgical innovation group. Um, and that was part of my kind of defiance of going, not only am I going to keep doing this, I'm going to encourage other people because I think it's a really good thing to be able to mix those two worlds.
Mm. Now, before we get on to more of the innovation work that you've done within the NHS, I wanted to talk about one of your career pivots, because on saying all this, you ultimately did then leave the NHS for a period. Is that right? And join BCG as a management consultant. So, what was the motivation to do that?
I had a kind of a huge itch to scratch. I had done the Mary Seacole NHS leadership course, and there's also bits about change management, and it all felt very kind of theoretical and hands off. But I was like, I really, really enjoy this. I really enjoy kind of understanding how the system works and how you can influence it. And when I finished doing that, there was an advert for another strategy consultant who will remain nameless, and they had a fellowship with the Royal College of Surgeons. Um, so I was like, oh, that could be quite an interesting thing to do. So I had the support of my program director to apply for the fellowship. So it would have been a year fellowship. And even with all my experience, I didn't get shortlisted, which I was absolutely gutted about. But I went back to the program director and said, look, I really do want to understand this other world and see how the the big guys in finance and the corporate world, how they do change management, how you do leadership, how you get the best out of people. Could I just go and apply for a role at BCG? And he was incredibly kind and gave me initially a year and then a 2-year UP. And so I applied for a job at BCG and got it. And it was phenomenal. I worked across media, healthcare. I worked internationally, learned so many new skills. And yeah, it was an amazing experience and one that I'm really, really encouraging other people that have a similar mindset to consider doing, because I think it's such a complementary field for so much of what we do.
It sounds like you had an amazing time and learnt a lot. So then why did you ultimately come back into the NHS? Were you tempted at all to stay and
Oh,
become partner, let's say?
uh, painfully tempted, painfully tempted. I remember having some very deep and meaningful conversations with my wife in on the international projects, calling her at the middle of the night and kind of going, what we do. But the bottom line is, I do think that clinical world it is phenomenal to have that experience and be trusted to do that job. I love medtech and I love medical innovation. It is literally the thing that drives me. And for me, I felt that being able to keep a foot in clinical and change it and drive it and support it from the inside kind of fit my model for how the system works, and keeping that clinical perspective. One of the things I did notice from my time out was very quickly you end up with slightly rose-tinted view of what healthcare is and what the healthcare service does and what the pain points are. And it's only when you're sitting in both roles, or not only, but I found that sitting in both roles allowed me to have a much clearer understanding of the problems and also the kind of the frictions of introducing new products. Whereas if you're completely out, I felt that I lost that kind of nuanced understanding of how the system worked, and I knew that I wanted to have that role. I wanted to lead innovation change, and for me, I felt that I needed to be inside in order to support that.
And then you ultimately landed in Buckinghamshire Healthcare, where you now hold a number of leadership roles. I guess the most relevant is the one in which you lead innovation and research in the trust. So tell me a bit more about that journey into Bucks and how you kind of shaped the innovation within the organization.
I would love to say it's part of a kind of grand master plan, but like with a lot of these things, it was kind of fortuitous. So I definitely, as a trainee, I worked at Bucks as a Oxford Thames Valley plastics trainee, and Bucks was the trust that stood out to me, and this is kind of a shout out to our now ex-CEO, who was the CEO at the time. And I remember the induction, sitting there, and Neil MacDonald turned around and said, "Hi, I'm Neil. I'm the CEO. My door is always open if you want to come and talk. If there are other ways that we can do things, come and chat." And there was a room full of medics, non-medics, and it was kind of a leader that you go, wow, that's really cool. Or a day as a really hot summer's day, kind of 30 whatever, and he and some of the leadership team came around with ice lollies to kind of help with stuff. I was like, wow, I want to come and work here because they get it, and they get that we're all kind of people. So I was really drawn to it, both from the kind of clinical side, because it's one of those DGH that's doing some incredibly exciting things, but still has the friendliness of the DGH. I've never been drawn by the kind of the big institutions and and so on that goes with that. I really love that kind of everyone's welcome, everyone has an opinion. Let's kind of drive forward. So I knew I wanted to work there when I finished training. And luckily, when I finished training, not too long afterwards, a role came up, which I got. And then within 6 months, the previous associate medical director for R&I demitted for other duties, and suddenly that role was there. So, well, I'd quite like that role. The R&I bit was purely fortuitous, and in fact, it was one of those things where multiple things happened in quick succession. So I'd been the technology editor for Bulletin for 3 years, and then my consultant job, and then the editorship came up, and I was like, I got a tap on the shoulder to go, "Why, do you fancy applying?" And I didn't have any other kind of additional things. Like, oh yeah, that sounds great, I'll do that. And then the R&I role at Trust came up. I was like, right, do you want to do that? Yeah, I'll do that. That sounds great. And then I had been badgering, and I'm sure we'll get to talk about this. I'd been badgering the Royal College of Surgeons leadership about innovation, especially following the Future of Surgery report. And there's kind of lots of presentations and stuff going along the line. And then after I accepted those 2 other roles, I got a tap on the shoulder going, Ryan, should we do this? And I was like, oh my word, great. But it did mean that in rapid succession, I suddenly took on 3 additional roles that maybe in a different order may not have been as sensible, but it's, again, yeah, as you can see, I get very enthusiastic about these things, and so jump in and then work out how I'm going to manage to do it afterwards.
I think there's a great joy in having a portfolio career, especially ones where they synergize with each other, because the 3 roles that you described right there must be so much overlap and so much benefit in to each other in being
Huge.
in those positions. I want to just focus a bit more on the role in Bucks and I guess your role in the brain unit, the innovation unit. There, you mentioned that you took the R&I role, so the research and innovation role, and I think what I've seen historically is that those who hold research and innovation roles, they typically lean more towards the research side of things. And maybe that's just a consequence of where, funding comes from. So what did you find when you took on that role? Because I suspect you would probably have more of a leaning on the innovation side, but I'm quite keen to kind of hear how you shaped it.
Yeah. So the first thing to say is that the research side so Buckinghamshire Healthcare NHS Trust punches so far above its weight from a research point of view already. So I can't claim any credit for that. But they're already one of the fastest recruiting sites, fastest setup sites. So in some ways, I got to join already an incredibly able, forward-thinking team. We had a little bit of um, innovation experience. So we were the first trust to bring euphonia into the NHS. We were their first site. So there was already a kind of understanding of the world of innovation. But I came in and it was myself and Chris, who's one of my colleagues who had half his time as innovation. So it was me and Chris. And just from our kind of enthusiasm, keenness to kind of drive things forward, we started to kind of build our network out, work with the local universities in order to build kind of academic partnerships, reach out to companies to help set up trials. And between the two of us, we're a great counterpart. I get very enthusiastic, and then Chris makes sure that all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. So it was a great partnership and allowed us to have a framework to go forward. What was then really great was it was at the same time that Professor Young was creating the insights group. So these are the kind of the
Mm.
hospitals that get it and want to take innovation forward. So we got invited to apply for the second cohort and we got that. So that got us the kind of credibility and some resourcing to help build it out. And then my trust does some amazing stuff. So we're one of the secondary and community care combined providers. So we already do some really exciting things across the two worlds. So BRAIN, which is Buckinghamshire Research and Innovation, is a kind of umbrella that puts together our population health work, our innovation work, our research work, because there's a lot of overlap between them. So if we can leverage our colleagues across the departments, bring them together, help kind of project manage things, we've got an amazing project manager, then we can kind of, use those skills. But yeah, so for me, I think you're right. I mean, most of those roles, research is the key one, but that's because that's what we're taught as clinicians. We're taught the research stuff. We're not taught the innovation stuff. So that fits nicer. And the reality is, at the moment, the research is still better funded. So you've got good
Mm.
support networks through the NIHR and the RRDNs. And the innovation side is still this slightly nebulous. You go to kind of 10 innovation services and ask them to define innovation. They'll give you kind of 15 different definitions for it. I think that's the reason for the split. But it's the innovation bit that gets me most excited. And I've just got great colleagues that can help on both sides of the equation.
And let's talk a bit about your role in the Royal College of Surgeons then, because you're the director of the Surgical Innovation Hub. So, what are you trying to achieve there? What are the exciting things going on in that organisation?
Yep. So I think to understand we need to go back to that future surgery report back in
Mm.
2018. So bearing in mind, as I said earlier, that we came from a world where innovation was a, the dark side. So you were not a Jedi if you were doing the innovation work. And then suddenly I read this report, and in fact, I got asked to review the report with my tech editor hat on. And as a good dyslexic, sitting down reading a report is not an easy task. But it was one of those things I sat down and went, wow, they get it. This is exactly what I've been going on about for ages. That it talked about actually how's surgery going to change at 5, 10, and 20 years. So that was
Mm.
quite exciting to realize that people got it, that tech would come. But then there's a line in it that struck an absolute chord. And that was, in order to leverage or in order to realize all of this potential, we need a workforce that can act as the conductors across data, across engineering, across clinical. And we need to make sure we have that workforce. Like, holy moly, this is exactly what I've been banging on about forever and a day. So, as I said earlier, approached the president and kind of put a very grand pitch of what we're going to put together for the iHub, and it certainly got kind of brought into reality. But in principle, we have two roles, and the reality is that my brain hub site, as in the brain lab at Bucks, and this is very similar aim. So it's how do you support frontline clinicians that have ideas or can see problems to kind of finesse those problems and then either start to develop their own solution or to work with industry to develop a solution, number one. Number two, how do you work with industry to make sure that the surgical voice is heard through their product development? Because there's no point in them spending tens of millions of pounds taking a new tool. They take it into the operating room, and the surgeons go, "Well, that obviously won't work because of this. If you'd asked us early on." So that's that's our aim. It's those two sides. How do you create the clinical innovators? How do you create the kind of the innovation friendly environment for people for outside to come in? We have a number of people across our team. We've got consultants, we've got trainees, we've got robotic surgeons, we've got Marcus So, who ran the military's health innovation hub. So we brought Marcus on board to kind of give us a steer. We've got people that have set up physical companies, digital companies, all from the clinical point of view, to try to take our learnings and kind of support going forward. And the most exciting thing is, as of 6 weeks ago, we have a National Surgical Innovation Fellow. So that was a definite
Mm.
dream for when we set up. So somebody that the college formally badges and looks after and employs to say, right, we not only believe in innovation, we're actually putting our kind of money where our mouth is. And here we go. Here's a National Surgical Innovation Fellow that's there to help shape strategy for how we improve uptake and creation of innovation across surgery.
Oh, and yeah, that's really incredible. And I think what strikes me is that you have done it as both an entrepreneur, but certainly in more recent years, you've taken those skills and done it as an intrapreneur as well, both in your home trust, but also in these supporting organizations as well. So it's super, super impressive. I want to ask now, you've mentioned your various different roles. How do you balance all of this alongside being a consultant plastic surgeon? Like, how do you make it all work?
With difficulty. I think it is easier as a consultant because I have a set timetable. So I know exactly when I am free to do various things. My trust role is they're paid PAs, as in I am employed by the trust to deliver 2 half days of R&I work. So that's protected. My college time is protected because it's my non-clinical time. I don't really have a private practice, and I'm probably in a small group of plastic surgeons without a private
Yeah.
practice. But for me, this other stuff is where I get my kind of excitement from. Um, but I have to have a very kind of eh, my diary is a disaster, and I am very lucky to have some of my colleagues who help me manage my diary because otherwise there's just so much going on. Um, I've started a journal recently. In fact, I've created an AI journal to help me kind of compartmentalize all these different bits that are going on at any moment. Um, so, yeah, with difficulty, with a lot of help and support, but staying true to that core thing that I am first and foremost a consultant surgeon, and everything else has to fit around that. It's never the other way round.
Fine. Because I suppose many innovators who are surgeons will talk about their concern about de-skilling, because ultimately with surgery, it's a vocation, and if you lose practice, then that can have a really material impact on clinical care. So, but it sounds like in your list of priorities, it's the clinical practice that comes top, and then
Yeah.
everything else follows.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. So I have a full-time NHS clinical practice. So I operate every week. I do multiple clinics. I do MDTs every week. So the kind of non-negotiable part. Everything else is built in and around that. Um, and yeah, your point earlier about the intrapreneur thing, I think is really important. And for me, there is lots of work that we're doing at the moment to try to encourage that. So I do think there are multiple clinical innovation roles that are equally as important. And if we're going to achieve things like the 10-year plan, having the people that can set up
Mm.
companies and spin those out and so on is great. But I think there is an overlooked group, which is the entrepreneurs, or as someone once described them as the super receivers, the people that understand the internal system and can help support bring those technologies in. So, yeah, I'm really pleased that does come across from the clinical entrepreneur part, and I do think that in itself should be a career path in the same way as the kind of clinical academics and researchers are, because I think it's absolutely key if we're going to drive change in the NHS.
So how do we do more of that? You know, in your roles, in your current leadership roles in innovation, you've mentioned there it's all about stimulating and creating more clinical innovators. So how do you see us doing this in the current NHS landscape?
Yeah, so I can tell you what we currently do, and I can tell you what a kind of pipe dream is. So
Please.
at the moment, yeah, I teach. I teach in both the University of Oxford and University of Bucks. The University of Buckingham is a clinical innovation entrepreneurship for undergrads as part of
Mm.
a selective component, a student set component. And so that we do 2 weeks where they go out into the hospitals, interview staff, clinical staff, catering staff, exec staff, to understand the problems that are real. We then spend the next part of the 2 weeks teaching them the Google design sprint process, and we bring in experts for various points. And over the 2 weeks, they then get to the point where they have a clear problem and even an MVP for something big. And from that, we've had 40 students in total over our 3 years. We've had groups that have had funding, and we just want to teach them that you can you don't need to accept problems for as they are, that you can go about and change it. And here's a technique, not but a technique for doing it. So starting off at med schools is really key. And in fact, I had a meeting
Mm.
earlier today
Get
with
them
someone in
early, yeah.
that they have a technical medical degree. So they literally get taught physics and engineering at the same time as their clinical world. Like that's definitely on my pipe dream side. Um, then having infrastructure in the college or in hospitals where people are interested in something can come and join us in the lab and go forward. And we have one secondary care clinical innovation fellow at the moment and two primary care innovation fellows in the trust. We've been running innovation fellows for 3 years now. Where I would love us to get, where I absolutely love us to get, is a structured career program for
Mm.
clinical entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs, where in the same way that we replicate the ACF model, the academic clinician model, where we maybe at core training we have very broad skills. They spend time at MHRA in industry, or whatever, and then as their kind of innovation focus tightens in the same way as our surgical specialty or clinical specialty tightens, you start to do bespoke training along the way. And that will get you to a point where and you've got to have careers at the other end. So I can probably count on two hands the number of people that have my role. Certainly that mixture of clinical and innovation, but you have a set path for the chief clinical innovation officers to go to. So we train people up along the way that have an interest, and we deliver them with job prospects at the other end. So that is the dream.
Gosh. I really hope you make that a reality. I'm actually very jealous that I'm now outside of the NHS because that sounds like my dream job.
Amazing, wasn't it?
Um, so we're running out of time now. So I have the last few questions for you. You've talked about how to create clinical innovators, but I now want to ask you about what advice you would give to clinicians who are looking at branching out and doing different things. What advice would you offer those people?
So I I have a catchphrase, so I'm going to be slightly cheesy at this point and just go for it, which is ABCD. So always be connecting dots. So if go and talk to people, like I have never said no to anyone reaching out to me on LinkedIn. Always delighted to have a chat. Always delighted to connect people with other relevant people. So don't be afraid to kind of just talk to people. And it could be that you go, well, I might be interested in management consulting. You talk to one, and go, that is not where I want to go, or whatever it would be. And that's
Yeah.
fine. So yeah, always be connecting dots in terms of people, but also if you go, well, actually, I want to create a new rostering, a new tourniquet, and you
Mm,
can't do it on your own. So go and find the people that fill in your gaps that you don't have, that you want to work with, that you want to kind of take things forward with. So that's a really huge part. So always be connecting dots. The rest is things like have that mindset that you go, actually, I'm not going to accept problems for as they are. I'm going to kind of make a thing about it. I really like the Arnold Schwarzenegger's last book, he talks about problems and he says a problem can't be that bad if it doesn't motivate you to do something about it. And that's the point, that you don't just go, well, actually, I just don't like medicine. I'm going to do that. I'm going to start a
mm,
company. That's not the answer. The kind of, what is that problem that you go, this is driving me nuts at work and I want to do something about it? Because the reality is, if it drives you crazy, it will drive someone up the corridor equally crazy. It will drive someone in a different hospital up the road equally crazy, in a different country. We have similar problems. So if there's a problem that motivates you to do something about it, do it. There's some great resources online, many free courses, many paid courses. Um, just just do it.
brilliant, brilliant. Absolutely love that. So fantastic. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you for joining me, Ryan. Absolutely
Pleasure.
loved our conversation. And for those listening, if you like what you hear and want to support the show, please do like and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or whatever podcast platform you're currently listening to us on. It would mean a lot to me, and it would help us spread the message to others exploring alternative paths. Thanks for joining us, and see you next time. Bye bye.